I'd like to welcome you all to Transitions Opportunities Forum and Networking Expo. It's the largest annual event for Pacific Northwest Jet Alumni Association. Please note we are recording this session. Names will not be recorded, but please feel free to turn off your camera if you like. And PNW Jet AA is the Jet Alumni Association for Washington State, Northern Idaho, and Montana. This year, the group is celebrating their 30th year. PNW Jet AA is working with the United States Jet Program Alumni Association this year, opening the Transitions Career event to those across the United States and the world. US Jet AA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that furthers US-Japan understanding by supporting alumni of the Jet Program. And this program that you're watching is generously funded by Claire. So my name is Jessica Record. I am the Transitions Coordinator from PNW Jet AA. This is my 4th year doing this, and I'm excited to see it go across oceans. And like I've said, seeing you all over the week, it's been great to see you. I was placed in Sanda Hyogo as an ALT from 2015 to 2016. For today's session, it's LinkedIn know-hows. This week, we've asked you to share your LinkedIn a lot, and now you get to actually learn how to use it. Tomorrow is our mentoring sessions and our closing remarks and industry breakout rooms. All of the sessions on Saturday require pre-registration. So please check your email for the link, and it should be going into the chat as well. And for the chat, if you want to connect with other attendees outside of this event, please share your LinkedIn information or any other information in the chat. We'll share a copy of the chat to all registrants at the end of the conference. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Rob Wee. Rob is a career and leadership coach from RSU Consulting, and I've heard him speak many times, and I always learn from him. So it's going to be a great talk. So Rob, if you'd like to begin.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for dialing in. It's super exciting. As Jessica has mentioned, I've had the great privilege of being able to deliver a talk during our Transitions event every fall for the last several years. I even got invited a couple of times to do the AfterJet conference over in Tokyo, so it's always fun for me to do this, and it's great to hear that people get a lot of value out of it. I know I do every time I actually participate in this event. It's always great to make new connections and kind of remember my own time on Jet and all of the excitement from that and all of the things that it's actually helped me do in my career. And so I'll be touching on some of those things as we go along today, but hopefully you get some value out of it. And what I'd like to ask, okay, so hold on, let me back up real quickly. So I was on Jet for a couple of years, and I actually went back to Japan and stayed for a couple of extra years following my time on Jet. They asked me to go ahead and put the dates that I was actually on there, and I put them on there, and then I realized, oh my God, there's like probably people who are dialing in who weren't even born when I was on Jet. Well, please don't put that in the chat if that's true. I don't want to hear about it. I like to think I'm still young at heart and everything else. So let's kind of jump into it and what we're going to cover today. So what we're going to be doing, oops, sorry, let me make sure that I've got my mouse going here. What we're going to cover today, we are going to be talking about LinkedIn as part of our discussion, but what I'd like to do is really set it in context. LinkedIn is one of, a lot of different tools and a lot of different methods that you can use to manage your relationships and to look for work and to tell your story. But it is just one of those things, right? And so it's an incredibly important tool, and it's one that we want to make sure that we're using correctly and that we're not hurting ourselves as we go along. So we'll spend some time on that, but we'll also spend some time just talking about other aspects of job search and career management in general. So to set some of that in context, I do kind of want to talk about my own background. And then really very specifically, because of the audience, we want to make sure we're kind of spending some time thinking about how do we actually leverage what we learned on Jet, what we experienced and everything else, and how does that become a part of our story and help us get like new opportunities and new directions that we might want to go in and figure out like where can we add value. And to that end, I want to make sure that we're also talking about like how are we going to be actually telling those stories. And then to the degree that it's actually possible, and I realize in kind of a virtual format like this, it's a little more challenging, but if there are insights and like comments that you can make that you think are going to benefit the entire group, like just things from your experience or other ways that you might want to tell your story that you've thought of, and here's a great way that I, make sure that people understand, like, all of the different things that I learned from Jet. Please feel free to throw those into the chat or into the Q&A, so we can make sure that everybody's kind of benefiting from the group knowledge. So my story, like I said, I was on Jet way back when, God, the last century. Went for a couple of years. I came out of college with like a degree in biology. I was thinking I want to become like a teacher eventually. And so Jet was going to be a really cool experience, right? Just building teaching experience, getting an opportunity to travel, save some money, and then just kind of like put that towards what at the time was my plan, which was to go to graduate school and then continue teaching biology and everything else. And you'll see as we kind of go through this, I ended up on a very different path, but extremely happy about how everything turned out. So I was on Jet for a couple of years. I came back after my Jet experience. I was looking around for work, just like we all do. And what I was finding was there was a very consistent theme that I was hearing from employers, which was, it's fantastic that you have, this experience and like working in Japan, and you've, gained some cultural understanding. Maybe I picked up some of the language. So all of those things were good. But what I kept hearing time and time again was, what else can you do, right? And by this, I think most of the employers that I was talking to were talking about like hard skills. It's like, well, do you have experience in accounting? Do you have experience as a project manager? Are you good at marketing? Are you good at, software engineering? Whatever it is, people were looking for like, what were the hard skills that I was going to be able to bring to like these different roles, in addition to all of the other things that that I was kind of thinking of as being like sort of my core set of skills that I just built over when I was over in Japan. And so for me, I was thinking, okay, I don't know what that is. And so I'm going to go back and try and figure it out. And I was fortunate to be able to say, and to have the means to be able to say, I'm going to go back to Japan. I stayed in like one of my friend's extra rooms for a while and found another job and got some additional Japan experience. And so I stayed there for like an additional 3.5 years. And at the time I was doing what I normally, could do at the time, which was I got a job teaching English again. And it was great. I was teaching everything from elementary school students up to business classes and things like that. But what really kind of like helped me start to really make some progress in my career was having the opportunity at the small language school that I was working at to kind of identify, hey, there are other things that are going on in this business where we need help, right? So I was working for a very entrepreneurial owner who was really great at drumming up new accounts, but he was terrible at managing them, right? So things like, collecting the fees and operationalizing like our scheduling, for all of our classes, maintaining all of the relationships with like the different business groups and community centers and things like that. And so I was starting to spend a lot of my time in the office trying to help out there, not because it was part of my job, but just because it's like, well, these are interesting problems to try to solve. And so I was kind of like jumping in and saying, okay, I can help here. And so I'm going to try. And so as I did that, I ended up becoming the operations manager at that school. And I did that for a couple of years. So when I finally did come back to the US and people were asking me, what can you do? Then I could talk about things like the account management that I'd done, or the training that I'd done for the teachers, the hiring, and a bunch of other activities that I just kind of got involved in when I was working like more of the front office within the school. I was fortunate to land a position as a recruiter. This was during the first .com boom. And so there were all these companies that were just doing like a ton of hiring. I happened to get into the field of software localization. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but when like software developers are looking to sell their products in other countries, you have to re-engineer and translate the software into all of those different languages in the different markets. And so I was working there, and I had a job where I was basically assigned the position of trying to find Japanese translators, Japanese technical translators for our projects. So I went, got certified. I started working as an HR manager, and basically that's what I've been doing for most of my career. I've ended up in HR which is not the place that I set out to be, but has been an absolute amazing ride. And if anybody actually wants to talk about, so how does the JET experience kind of fit into a career in HR very specifically, I'm happy to talk to you about that. I do think that a lot of the opportunities that I've gotten over the years within HR have absolutely been bolstered by my experience as a JET. I've gotten the opportunity to do a lot of global HR, working with colleagues not only in Japan, but China and other parts of Asia, Europe, India, and I've done a lot of traveling in all of those countries as well. And even though a lot of the jobs and the projects that I ended up working on had nothing to do with Japan, I think a lot of the managers I've worked with are like, well, you've gotten the international experience, so you'll probably be able to leverage and apply that in other places. And so that's opened up a ton of doors for me. The other titles, the other kind of roles that I've had here related to HR, I actually took some time and created my own consultancy a number of years ago because I was getting so many people kind of coming to me and saying, hey, can you help me with my own individual career search? And so that's how I've ended up doing a lot of this work. That very interesting title at the bottom of Career Ambassador is actually related to the work that I had done at Amazon for the last several years. They were creating a new performance management program, and they had this new role that they had created called the Career Ambassador to kind of help employees work through like when they're having kind of difficulty at the company. But it was I can always say very proudly that I was the first career ambassador ever hired in Amazon, which is kind of an accomplishment, and I'm kind of proud of that. So moving off from like sort of my story, and again, I shared that mainly just to kind of give you some context for some of the things that we're going to be talking about kind of going forward, but also to kind of give you an idea. Let me say from the outset, like I never intended to get from where I was on JET to career ambassador, and these things have happened. The doors have opened in lots of different ways, not only from the experience that I've had, but I think also very particularly kind of going back to that very initial experience of being asked what else I can do. I try to always ask myself, what else can I actually do, or what else can I actually learn, or very importantly, what value can I add? Because a lot of times it's not tied to the particular job title that you have. There are other ways that you might identify within an organization or institution or a group of people where you can actually add other kinds of value. And that, I think, is always an important perspective to maintain as you're kind of going along. And so related to that, if any of you have actually looked at my LinkedIn profile online, you'll notice that I'm pulling this quote from there, and this is one that I always keep visible. And it's, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do that, right? Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I think nowadays, maybe this is more important than ever. For practical reasons, it always makes sense. You're going to pursue the kinds of jobs where you actually are good, where you actually have experience, where you have some skills. And I think that makes perfect sense. But what I would encourage you to do is always kind of pay attention to your own internal barometer around your passion, your excitement, and your engagement. Because the more that you can actually stay in that space and actually do jobs that kind of maximize that part of your energy, the more likely you're going to be successful, right? I know Emily the other day when she was talking through the resumes discussion, she had a version of this, and I was delighted to see it when she put hers up. Mine is slightly different. It doesn't have like Ikigai in the center, but it is the same concept, right? Of there are always going to be, like, if you're looking at your skills and your experience and you're looking at the kinds of jobs that are available, or maybe the job that you want to create, there's going to be an intersection, right? Of the things that you actually love to do, the things that you're good at, and then what the world needs, again, from a practical standpoint, and then what the world is going to pay for that. And if you are very, very fortunate, you can find something that's, an intersection of all of those different things. And I don't think that's just reserved for like a lucky few. I think it's a very intentional thing to try to get yourself from, a place where it's, just about career or it's passion or whatever, and try to move closer to the center. And one way that you can do that, because one of the questions that I get a lot is, how do I figure out what that is, right? And if you've ever, I don't know if folks have ever gone through like strength finders or any of those kinds of exercises. One of the men who actually developed some of that thinking. I actually had an opportunity to see him speak a couple of years ago. And he had an interesting exercise, and I would assign it as homework for everybody here as well. There's two different things that I would suggest that you do following this presentation. And one of them is whatever it is that you're doing now, whether you're working, whether you're not working, whenever you're interacting with other folks or you're just trying to get something done, here's what I would suggest. Take for a week or so and get a journal. And basically let's say hour or every time you actually, accomplish something or complete something or are thinking of something, write it down, right? And basically have two columns that you're kind of putting things in. You get often asked, like either for your resume or for interviews, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And what I would challenge you to think is to rethink is how you think of strengths and weaknesses, because quite frankly, I think that's kind of a bogus question. But the way that I would think about strengths is something that makes you feel strong, something that energizes you and excites you, right? So that's going to be one column. The other one is going to be, what are the things that make you feel weak? In other words, what are the things that drain you of energy? And so it's going to be different for different people. But I think what you'll find is interesting is after you've done that for a week, take a look at what you've put in different columns, right? So if you're seeing that there's a lot of teaching or interaction with other people or whatever it is that you're putting in, like this is the column that really engages me and makes me feel good, makes me feel strong, then try to then figure out, okay, how do I identify career paths that are going to maximize those kinds of things and minimize the other things? I'll give you a real world example for myself. I am known as being very good at, within my sort of HR roles and everything else, I'm good at employee relations, and employee relations within a company basically is investigations and things like that when some employee is, I don't know, accused of sexual harassment, for example, right? And so you do an investigation, you interview a number of people, you try to collect the evidence to kind of figure out one way or another, was that actually true? And if it was, then what actions does the company actually need to take, with that employee, and how do you protect the other folks in the workplace? So like I said, I've developed a reputation for being very good at those things. I'm good at the interviews. I'm good at figuring out, putting together a very logical sort of argument one way or the other about what it is. And that core piece of it, maybe I kind of like, right? Like just the problem solving and the investigation and trying to do it. But honestly, I don't like working in employee relations, and I would hate to have a job that was just like about that, like all the time, right? Because all I'm ever doing is dealing with unhappy people, right? Unhappy managers, unhappy employees. And that's just draining after a while. So it's something that I may be good at. It's something that in the traditional sense of strength, somebody might say, oh, that's a strength of yours. You should spend more time doing that. And I'm going to say, no, that's not it. Like the parts of it that give me strength, the parts of it that engage and empower me are the parts that are about problem solving and about using logic and data and things like that. So those are the things that I might write in the strength column. But this piece about dealing with unhappy employees all the time, that's I'm going to put in like weakness. So try to kind of map that out. And like I said, spend like a week or whatever it is, 4 or 5 days on it. And I think you'll be really interested to kind of see how those patterns start to emerge for yourself when you start thinking about strengths and weaknesses in a slightly different way. Let's see, I'm going to throw this to the chat for just a quick second. Can anyone figure out what this is actually meant to represent?
Sound? I guess sound?
What's that?
Sound?
I
Sound?
think I know.
said sound.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the years of your life, isn't it?
Who just said that?
That was me, Richard.
Richard, you're like the only person who's actually ever figured that out in all of the different years that I've actually put this up there. So congratulations, I have no prize for you, but you can brag to that to other people if you want to.
No, my brother showed me in a very emotional conversation about it.
Ah, okay, whoa.
Yes.
I kind of thought I'd come up with this one on my own. But yes, the years of your life. So it is a 10 by 10 grid, right? So there are 100 circles. I'm being very optimistic about what the years of your life are going to be, but dang it, I'm going to go ahead and make it to that century mark. And so as you're looking at this, the way that I look at this is I start to map out sort of like, where am I right now, right? So in those first couple of lines, you're what? You're learning how to ride a bike, you're graduating from high school, you're starting to go to college. In the third line, you're maybe like going to graduate school. For many of us, it was when we actually went on JET and got all of those experiences. But it's not so much the ones that are behind you as the ones that are in front of you, right? And I think no matter where you are, and I'm fairly well down on this set of lines, no matter where you are, there is still so many years in front of you. And I include this one in here simply because there's always a lot of different things, whether it's society or the news or even talking to our parents or our colleagues, where people are saying, you got to figure out what it is you're going to do when you grow up. There's not enough time. You got to, don't waste your time, doing all of these other things. And I'm going to suggest that there is a lot of time, right? And there is a lot of opportunity to go in different paths, to experiment a little bit, and to try different things. And it's probably going to be a while before you can say with any real certainty, this is what my life's passion is about. This is what it is that I want to spend all of my time doing. I am still figuring this out, right? And I've gone through a lot more lines on this thing than everybody else has. And that's exciting for me, right? Like I could still look at it and say, you know what, I still have time to kind of try different stuff, and it's going to be very exciting to see where I end up. So all of that is context, right? All of that is just backdrop that I want to set just in terms of thinking about your career is kind of a lifelong thing, right? And I'm absolutely excited for everybody on this call thinking all of these different journeys kind of like, it's very cool that we all have a common starting point, right? Well, if you want to call JET a starting point, but let's call that a starting point. We have this commonality of experience, but also lots of different paths that we're all going to take. And I think that's a really cool thing. So let's jump into kind of talking about LinkedIn for a while. Let's get kind of technical about the actual platform itself. So LinkedIn and other social media tools, super important for being able to manage your relationships and for being able to look for work. I have a couple of tips here that I'd like you to just kind of consider as you're putting it together. And I'm making an assumption that everybody's either got a LinkedIn profile already or is planning to build one out. One thing that I would suggest is if you already have a profile or you haven't really kind of like filled one out completely yet, go into the settings, and then there's a section in settings and privacy under visibility, and there's a piece in there around sending out updates. I forget exactly how it's worded. It's down in the visibility section. Whenever you make changes to your LinkedIn profile, you can have it set up so that it actually is letting your other contacts know, oh, so-and-so has updated their job experience, or so-and-so has updated their about summary, or has updated their headline. And rather than kind of spamming out because you're going in there and making a bunch of wholesale changes, turn that off at first, make all of your changes, and then actually turn that back on, right? So that'll allow you to just have like, hopefully it'll just kind of turn out as like one update that basically says so-and-so has updated their LinkedIn profile, but you don't necessarily want to, every couple of hours be sending out to all of your different contacts, oh, you updated this job, or oh, you updated this part of your experience, or oh, you added these skills. So that's just like a hygiene thing. The difference between your resume and LinkedIn. So the cool thing about a LinkedIn profile is that it can be a lot more, and it should be a lot more personal than a resume, right? So a resume is in a very particular kind of format. It's dates and times and descriptions of the jobs that you've held, usually in reverse chronological order. It's got your certifications, your education, things like that. But you're not even using complete sentences on a resume, and that's by design. And so it's a very different thing when you're going into your LinkedIn profile, right? You can really be a lot richer about that. I pulled in quotes into my about section. I've got recommendations from other people that I've worked with that they've written in like natural language. There's skills and education and things like that that people can make recommendations around you for. So they can say, oh, I think Rob is, great at project management, or he's great at recruiting, or he's great at hiring and developing new employees, whatever. So you can see where all of those different things are kind of coming into your story. But the thing that is different about it is your resume is basically just about like your experience in a very dry sort of format. Whereas LinkedIn is more about like, who are you as a person? Who are you? What is it like to work with you? What kinds of things are you really passionate about? What kinds of things, what kinds of projects do you actually like to participate in? Where have you had that success? What do other people say about you? It's always very powerful when you can get other people to help tell your story along with you, right? And so being able to see that in LinkedIn and manage it is really important. And this tag that I have in here about resume versus LinkedIn, and by the way, the best resume in the world, the best LinkedIn profile in the world, it's not going to get you the job, right? There's very rare sorts of like instances where somebody is just going to be able to say, oh, I actually got this opportunity because somebody spotted my LinkedIn profile and they hired me. That does happen, right? And that's great, but what it can lead you to do, particularly with your resume and particularly with LinkedIn, is it can lead you to spend too much time trying to refine and build those tools, as opposed to really spending your time building relationships and networking and trying to actually identify opportunities that way. So there's a set of statistics that I've actually seen in terms of talking to successful job seekers. And if you ask successful job seekers, where did they actually find their roles, or how did they actually find their roles? Maybe 5%, 10% will tell you something like, well, I sent in my resume and I got a call back and I actually got the job. And then there's going to be another, 10%, 15% that are going to say, well, it was because I was working with a headhunter or a recruiter and that person helped me get a job. And then the remaining, whatever that ends up being, 70%, 80% of people are going to tell you it's because I knew somebody, right? It was because of networking. It was because of relationships that I've had with other folks. And so when you think about like, how do you actually want to spend your time in the midst of a job search, if you're looking at like week by week basis, 5-10% of the time spend it on resume and LinkedIn and kind of refining those things, right? But spend the other, majority of your time with working your relationships and everything else. And LinkedIn is a useful tool for doing that, right? We'll talk about that in a second as well. But don't worry too much about like trying to create quote unquote the perfect LinkedIn profile. What you are trying to do though is boost your searchability, right? So you want to make sure that you are using keywords. If you can stay active in different conversations, there's all kinds of different groups within LinkedIn, in terms of alumni for different universities or different programs. The JET program, I think, manages like a LinkedIn profile. There's different trade groups that you can actually join, and you can expand your connections that way. But you can also be like an active poster, right? Like, so for any social media, the more that you're actually commenting, the more that you're actually posting different things to your feed. Maybe you want to share an article or some kind of insight to, all of the different people that you're connected to. The more you do that, the more likely it is that you're going to be one of the first results that's actually found when somebody's actually doing a search of somebody with like your skills and background. Public profile URL, URL is a super simple thing to do. When you join LinkedIn, very often it's just going to assign you some version of your name, but usually followed by like numbers and letters and whatnot. And rather than do that, you can go in and as long as your particular combination of first name, last name, or middle name, or whatever it is not actually being used, then you can go ahead and claim that one as your URL. And that is a lot cleaner to put on your business cards, on your resume, or if you want to include it in like the contact thing for your email. Skills is another section in LinkedIn that is interesting to manage. You can get, I think I said it earlier, but you can get the situation where you have people recommending you for certain skills or endorsing you for certain skills. They may or may not be accurate or something that you actually want to include on there. And you can manage that. You can manage whether or not you have it visible or not. So for me, for example, if somebody wanted to put in there, according to my old example, of, oh, Rob is really great at employee relations. Well, one, I have to determine whether or not the person really knows that or not. And if they do, I have to determine whether or not I want it to be visible or not, because I may not be, pursuing those kinds of positions. If you are kind of noted as being really good within your group at being great at project management, but you don't happen to like project management, then again, you can make a decision about whether or not you actually want that to be visible on your skills list or not. But it is useful, right? So when you are applying for jobs, or when you are looking for jobs, for example, if I go and I look at like HR manager jobs and things like that, LinkedIn will give me a little list and say, you have 9 out of the 10 skills that are required for this role, right? Because it's looked at the resume versus, it's looked at the job posting versus my LinkedIn profile, and it's given me kind of an idea for a launch point kind of bit of thinking to kind of figure out, okay, do my skills actually align to this job or not? And that's super useful because it also then gives you things that the employer may be thinking of as important, and you might want to highlight those kinds of things in your cover letter or when you have an opportunity to have a phone interview or an informational interview, or during the interview process, you kind of know what parts of your background to kind of focus on. There is the functionality to be able to add media, so you can include links, you can include documents, you can include photos and videos. Do keep in mind that a lot of the work product that you might want to share on there is very often proprietary to whatever organization you were a part of. So you do have to kind of think about that, but particularly I think for folks who've done a lot of more creative or more visual type work, it can be really useful to put those things out there as kind of parts of your portfolio. Jessica, are we getting, I noticed the chat is getting some activity, so I'll just pause there for a sec.
Yes, so lots of people are agreeing with the URL, didn't know that they could change their URL, and sharing some resources. What color is your parachute?
Yes.
About.
Yep.
And some LinkedIn other like Jet AA. And then we did have a question from Connor just now. What if we are wanting to apply / get attention in a field we have little to no experience in?
Okay. I noticed we had some of those kinds of questions the other day when we were kind of talking about resumes as well, so I kind of wanted to cover that. So there's a couple of different kinds of experience, right? You've got like the actual hard skills, like, it's kind of hard to apply for an accounting job if you don't actually have some accounting background, right? But everybody has to start somewhere. And so there's opportunities to get classes, obviously. There's opportunities to, identify mentors within those fields and figure out how did they actually get into them. HR, for example, for me was kind of a total accident, right? And I've been fortunate in some of the roles that I've gotten in the past where people were willing to hire me more for like the how of how I actually do the work, as opposed to the fact that I actually had the experience from the get-go. And I think you will also find that, more enlightened hiring managers are gonna be thinking like that. It's like, I can take, whatever. I can send you to a class, or I can take 3 months or 6 months to kind of get you the skills that you actually need for a job. I can't, okay, we're recording this, so I'll be careful with my language. I can't train you to not be a jerk at work, right? Like, if you're the kind of person who can actually get things done, but that person is leaving dead bodies in their wake and nobody actually wants to work with them afterwards, then that's actually a bad hire, right? I would much rather hire somebody who's got the ability to work with like diverse kinds of people and everything else, and then be able to help them acquire those skills. Now, having said that, I actually do think that there are a bunch of transferable skills that we get from having been on JET and what that experience is. So I'm sorry, was there any additional comment on that or anything before I move to?
Is that good, Connor? Again, any other thoughts or anything? Clarifying questions? I'll assume silence is okay. Okay, I think we're good.
So then let's talk about then some of the things that I feel like JET actually helps us do or require, or things that we can actually talk about. And there's different ways to fold this into your resume and LinkedIn and the way that you actually talk to other people. But let's see, normally I would just ask, right? Like, and I'd be writing up on the board and whatnot, rather than do that, because that's gonna take a little bit of time. Let me just kind of throw out I'm gonna throw out a couple of these, and then hopefully that's gonna help folks kind of think about it. So let's see. So we're nothing if not adaptable, right? All of us got hired in an English or other language speaking country and then got dropped into a situation in Japan and told to kind of figure things out, right? Like all of a sudden you are the English teacher or not the English teacher, but you're one of the English teachers and you're expected to be able to work with a Japanese English teacher and kind of like continue curriculum or build something new or whatever it is, right? And we have to be adaptable, right? Like, and that's a skill and a flexibility that a lot of other people don't get. Let's see. Tell me if this story sounds familiar, okay? So I'm sitting in the teacher's lounge one day and like 4 or 5 of the other teachers approach my desk. And immediately I'm already thinking, oh, this can't be good, right? So, because that doesn't normally happen. So they're gathered as a group and they're kind of standing around. And one of them is just like, hey, Rob, would you be willing to, it was a private school. And so we were always out there trying to recruit students to the school. And they're like, well, we have an event coming up, where we're going to have prospective students and their parents in. And as part of their tour of the school, would you be willing to give like a demo English class and then demonstrate the capabilities of the language lab, right, to this group? And I was like, sure, that sounds cool. When are we going to do that? And literally one of them looks at his watch, right, and goes, do you have time now, right? And I'm laughing inside because I've had no time to prepare. This is like maybe 6 months into my stint with this school. And literally now we have like a group of prospective students and parents walking down the hallway, heading for the classroom, and they want me to put on this, dog and pony show for them. And so I figure it all out as I'm kind of walking down the hallway and we get it done. But that to me is like just one example of the kind of thinking on our feet that is just kind of natural, like within the JET program. I'm sure a bunch of you have either similar stories or maybe the exact same story of that kind of thing. And it's like, we would not necessarily have thought we would be able to do those kinds of things before. But, just the demands of the program, the demands of the experience, just, help you kind of like build those muscles, right? At the very least, you develop a real strong sense of humor about this kind of thing, right? Which is also another really super critical skill. Negotiation skills, right? So you're working you're working across cultures to try to get something done, right? And that to me is like the core of negotiation, right? You're working with people who are in a very different camp from you. You have like a common goal, and that's great, but how you actually get there, how you get things done, who's going to be doing what, it requires a certain amount of negotiation skills. And again, I think this is one of those things that our JET experience helps us refine. Communication skills, not to be too obvious about it, but very often when you're looking at, I think this came up the other day as well, very often when you're looking at job postings, one of the things they put on there is, you must have excellent or strong communication skills. And they don't necessarily tell you what the heck that means. But what I like about our experience is that we have a lot of different examples of things that we can actually show, talk about to demonstrate that we actually have really strong communication skills, whether that is working with young people, whether that's working with people who are actually speaking a different language, whether it's working with your colleagues and within the staff room and trying to figure out like how are you going to do things there. You may be talking with people's parents. You're navigating like your daily life, right? I had a situation where my water heater in my apartment actually stopped working. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to get this fixed. I pick up the phone. I call the number that's on the water heater. And as the phone is ringing, I realize I have no idea how to describe what is going on and how to ask for this to get fixed, right? And so, and I'm on the phone, so I can't use gestures. I can't just point to the water heater. And so I had to kind of figure out, how do I communicate that I need help on this thing? And so there are all these kinds of day-to-day life experiences that you can use as really powerful examples of, here's how I've actually refined my communication skills. Are there comments about that? I see that there's some stuff kind of coming in.
Yeah, we've got other skills people are thinking of. I had to scroll up, like empathy, patience, ability to build community, time management, perseverance, mass communication, abilities, resourcefulness. I think I'm reading some project management and meeting deadlines, collaboration, and then they're just going up.
Yeah, so I would absolutely capture that. I'm gonna go ahead because everybody's started to capture a lot of the things that I would talk about. Let me put up some of my thoughts as well. But yeah, I mean, that is it sounds like a fantastic list. And I would definitely kind of look at it and just kind of think about like each one of those things, where are my experiences showing up, right? Like whether it's a work anecdote or whether it's just a simple one in terms of like working with my Japanese friends, or the time that we all went camping together and we had to kind of figure out like, how are we actually going to manage that? And again, it's just like there are cultural differences, right? And when you can build like skills across those kinds of boundaries, then I think you're talking about differentiated skills that you're not really going to see on like other people's resume or portfolio or whatever. So I do think that JET gives us a ton of those kinds of things. Appreciation for diversity, again, I think this is such a tremendously important skill these days. And again, it applies to every job, not just because I happen to be in HR, but I think for any role right now, when you're looking at, if you're talking about, for example, roles where you're working remotely and things like that, communication skills, being able to kind of understand and walk in somebody else's shoes and understand sort of how all of this is impacting them. The appreciation for diversity, the appreciation for different work styles, there's a lot of different stuff like that that JET has helped us hone. Perspective, I think, is one of the other ones that is huge. You go over with a certain perspective, you spend a number of years working and living there and building friendships and learning how to do things, and then your perspective gets turned all upside down again when you come back, right? Or if you move on to a different country other than Japan. There's the reverse culture shock, but you also, I think, can get to see like things before that you just kind of took for granted in a very new and different way. And that is a really interesting skill to have when you can, particularly when you're doing things like problem solving and project management and whatnot in the workplace, that ability to really be able to understand how other people are seeing things and be able to kind of like meet them where they are, because you have like more of a global perspective, is tremendous. The other one that I want to call out is storytelling, because I think I've mentioned it a couple of different times, but it's also like a huge, I think to me, it's probably one of the single most critical skills that folks can continue to build right now, because it really helps encompass a lot of different things. It factors into like negotiation, communication, being able to kind of like work with diverse work styles, to have like a leadership, being able to tell really impactful stories, being able to kind of tell your story about why you think a certain thing should happen in a certain way, or why you think we need to go in a particular direction. Having that kind of effective ability is incredibly important. I'll pause for a second. Whenever I see this thing start to light up, I'm just going to pause. So what else are we getting?
Did lots of talk about reverse culture shock. And some people are still going through it. That's normal, guys. And I'm throwing this in here. If you're dealing with reverse culture shock, please reach out to your chapter or to me, and my email for transitions is in there, because it's real, it's hard, and that seems to be the main thing that's happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. Being able to sit down and talk, like even for me, right? Like whatever it is, 30 years further on, I can't tell you what a joy it is to actually sit down and talk to somebody who actually gets it, right? Like when I can explain, what I was doing and how I was doing it and all the crazy, zany sort of adventures and things like that I had, I can tell that to my friends and they kind of was like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. But if I'm talking with like other Jets, it's fantastic, right? Because we have that shared experience and it just really does help you kind of figure out like, how do you deal with missing X, about Japan or whatever, or where can I find, this kind of like food or snacks or whatever it is, like being able to talk within your network about that kind of thing, super important. Let's see. So again, hopefully that makes sense. I think there's a much more stuff beyond just the things that I actually listed up there in terms of skills that I think are really important to be able to put into, so you can fold those into your profile, right? As you're telling your story, you can really put in a lot of either the words or the anecdotes about those things. Finding other people to help tell your story, I think, is also a super important thing to do. You can throw the keywords into like your resume and stuff like that, but it's also going to be really effective when you have other people kind of providing you with those words and how to actually express things. So the second bit of homework that I would actually suggest, so the first one was about the journaling and kind of figuring out like, what are the things that make you strong and engaged, and what are the things that kind of drain your energy. That would be one piece of homework. The other piece that I would suggest you do is interview some of the people that you've actually worked with, right? And ask them questions about what it was like to work with you, right? So, I mean, maybe the first question is simply, what was it like to work with me, right? What did you like about working with me? What would you consider me to be like your go-to person for? What are the things that you know that you could trust me with? What are the kinds of things that, how would you describe me, right? Like what would be the, the kinds of things that occur to you if somebody was asking you about me? And you're not asking them for a recommendation. You're really just genuinely trying to find out like, how are they seeing you, right? And again, I think if you do that with 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 people, you'll find one that you'll probably start to hear themes, right? About like how people actually see you in the workplace or in teams or in organizations or whatever it is. But you'll also start to hear, well, one, it's also usually fairly gratifying. People are going to tell you, pretty positive things about yourself. But you'll also start to hear like words and phrases and things like that that you can include in your resume and LinkedIn. And the way that you would do that then is, I'm known as whatever, right? Like I have a reputation for being somebody who's, who earns trust in the workplace, right? I have a reputation for always delivering what it is that I say that I'm going to do. And those are very powerful phrases to be able to include on your resume or in your LinkedIn profile, or even as you're kind of talking with other people, right? So start borrowing some of that language from other folks. And I think you'll find that it starts to get easier. I know one of the questions that I saw the other day is, I have a hard time just like, talking myself up, right? Of bragging about myself, like on my resume or LinkedIn, it sounds like I'm boasting, blah, blah, blah. But when you get this, when you get this wording and everything else from other people and get it from, their perspective and their opinions, you're not boasting, you're just reflecting how people genuinely see you, right? And so if you start thinking about that, then it's not bragging. If somebody actually tells you, hey, you're one of the most trustworthy people that I know, then you're not bragging about that, right? You're just reflecting what it is that other people have actually said about you. So I threw us into the networking section of this, and I know like when I use the word networking, a lot of times I get like kind of a reaction from folks because, and some of the words that I've heard to kind of express this are around, it feels like schmoozy or sleazy or whatever it is, right? Networking is really just simply, talking to people that you already have like relationships with, or building new relationships with people that, you may be able to help, right? And I encourage you to think about it that way, right? It's not about going around and asking for help or asking for a job or asking for connections. It can feel that way sometimes, but I think if you turn it around within your head, it'll start to get a lot easier, right? Where it's more about where can I add value? How can I actually help like other people? And don't get too hung up on the idea that, people are busy, that's fine. That's absolutely true. But people want to help, right? Like when you call them up and say, hey, I'm starting a job search in this area and I'm interested in, learning more about like your career or the things that you've done. One, people feel kind of good when it's just like, hey, I think that's cool that you think I'm an expert in my field, or you think that I can be helpful. And generally speaking, people do actually want to help. And we are all going to be in that position someday, right? Like everybody is either in a position to help or is going to be in a position where they actually need help. And so this is where I get into the whole karma is real kind of thing. The more that you can actually help other people, the more that that's going to come back around to you. And I've seen that time and again, and I've heard that time and again from people that I've worked with. The more you actually can put more of that positive energy into the system, the more that you're actually going to reap that as well. And so as you're telling your story, it is more about, it's not so much, hey, I want a job in project management or whatever it is, right? It is more about, hey, I have these capabilities in project management, and I think I can help solve your problems at work. What are the kinds of things that you're facing right now, and where can I actually add value? And try to kind of like frame it for yourself that way. Because I think the more that you can talk about what you have to offer as opposed to what you're hoping to get, the more amenable people are going to be to actually trying to help out, right? And every hiring manager that's out there, everybody who's got a position, whether it's posted or not, has problems that they are trying to solve, right? They don't have enough people, or they don't have enough experienced folks on the team, or they're starting something new, or whatever it is. But they have things that they're wanting to get done, right? And they want to hire people, and they want to know who it is that's actually going to be out there that can actually bring the experience and the skills or the attitude to be able to actually add something, add value to their organization.
So Rob, can
yes.
I interrupt for a second?
Absolutely.
We actually had a question. So Maria has been applying to some places, and she said that as she's waiting for responses, she found JET alumni on LinkedIn who are working within the departments she applied to, and she'd love to reach out to them as an informal meeting, but she's worried that, is that appropriate? Since you already applied, would that come off as unauthentic? And would it be more ideal to request an informal interview before applying?
So is the person in the hiring position, or they just happen to be in the group?
Maria, I think you can talk if you want, or you can throw it in the chat. Because it sounds like they're not in the informal, not hiring position.
Okay. Actually, kind of either way. Like the fact that you've already applied to me actually makes it almost better, right? Where you can actually say, hey, look, I'm super interested in this group. I'm super interested in the role. I think I have some skills. I would love to talk, connect with you just to kind of hear more about what is it like to work on the team? What's the culture of the organization? What are the opportunities for promotion, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of different things that you can ask about in that sort of situation. So I would absolutely do that, right? Because anything that they're actually willing to share is just going to help you like prepare for the interviews, or even decide whether or not, hey, look great on paper, but in reality, maybe it's not something that I want to do. But all of that information is going to be super valuable. Flip it for a second. Let's say that you hadn't applied for a position. And I think this is important research. As you're going around and you're looking for different positions, you're looking at organizations, I think it's always important to kind of look at, when you pull up a different company, you'll get a list, right, of all of the people who've either worked there in the past or working there currently or whatever, and what their relationship to you might be, right? And that is super important, right? Where you can like look at a job and say, oh, okay, this is something I think I might want to apply for, but before I do that, I can see that there's a couple of people that I could reach out to kind of find out more about it before I decide whether or not it's the right thing for me to go forward and do. So whether you've already applied or whether you're getting ready to apply, either way, I still think it's super important to get that additional information and context. There's been very few times in my career where I've just kind of gone in cold, right? Where I just saw something, it was interesting enough in terms of the way they wrote about it that I just sent in my resume and got a response and got a job. Like there's very, very few times when that's actually happened. It has happened. I mean, I'm not going to say don't do it. But the vast majority of times I'm looking at different places and figuring out who it is that I might know there, getting more information, deciding whether or not to apply. But even as I'm doing that, they're like, well, if you're interested in this kind of thing, you might want to talk to so-and-so instead. And they help you make like other connections. And that's the kind of thing, like if anybody ever reaches out to you is when wanting to get, kind of pick your brain and stuff like that, build out the network, right? Take that opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I think I can make some other introductions that might be more useful for you or whatever. Or if it's you and you're the one pursuing those things as you're talking to people, ask them, you know, is there anyone else you think I should be talking to now that we've had a chance to kind of talk about what I'm interested in or what kinds of skills and experience I actually bring. Maybe not for this role, but do you think there's other places that I should be talking to or other people that I should be talking to, right? Just to get more of that information. Because that's how all of this is supposed to work, right? A lot of times jobs aren't being posted, right? It's like, oh, okay, I know that team is getting ready to expand because they have this super secret project going on or whatever it is, but we're not posting any of those jobs. But hey, you sound like you'd be really great. Let me forward your information over to the hiring manager, and boom, like you're starting to kind of like go for something that wasn't actually even posted in the first place, right? But that's how all of the networking and everything actually works, right? Is you're getting this information or you're putting your reputation and your story out there in a way that allows you to get connected to different opportunities.
Excellent, thank you.
I have some examples there in terms of different places you can consider or start with, right? The Alumni Association, very obvious. And in fact, if I don't have like some LinkedIn connection requests sitting in my mailbox, like by the time I finish this presentation, I'm gonna be sad, right? Because it means that I didn't get through to you. So I should absolutely be one of those people. Feel free to connect. Remind me, because I get a lot of these things, remind me where it is that we actually we actually connected. So if you just say, oh, I was just there when you were presenting, that's fine. But that gives me a better idea of, how I might be able to help you. In-service networks, it's very interesting when you think about like in-service networks, but everybody has one, right? So you have the barista at the place that you go to every day, you have your massage therapist, you have like your doctors, there's a lot of different people that by the very nature of their work, they know a ton of people, right? And I have a quick story on that one. At one point I was getting physical therapy, and I happened to be looking for a job at the time. I'm talking to my physical therapist, and he was asking me, what are you doing for the rest of the day? And I was like, oh, I've got these interviews at this company downtown. Oh, that's interesting. I know some people there. And it just, long story short, it turns out that one of his other clients, one of his other patients, was one of the people I was going to be meeting on my interview loop. And so, and I did get the job, and it's not because I happened to be, it wasn't because we both had bad backs or anything like that, but it was one of the things that occurred to me afterwards was, I've been going to this physical therapist for like 6 months, and never once did I think of asking him, hey, do you happen to know anybody at one of these other companies, right? And so now I like really try to be very conscious of that as I'm kind of dealing with anybody. If I happen to have like organizations I'm interested in or positions I'm interested in at the time, then I'm talking to everybody, because who knows, like somebody's sisters, cousins, roommate, whatever it is, could be somebody that's at one of these organizations. We're all connected in some way. Social networks, business associations, volunteering, those are all very common kinds of things. But again, I used to volunteer at the Seattle Aquarium, for example, and there's all kinds of people there because they have a common interest in like the conservation of the marine environment. But they came from all kinds of different walks of life: university students, lawyers, people who worked at the EPA, people in corporate positions like myself. I mean, there was all kinds of different people there, and that was always a really cool thing to help expand my network as well.
And real quick, Rob, we have another question. Do you have any advice on how to best market your interest in 2 different industries through LinkedIn? For example, I have the 2 industries I'm trying to get into written in my headline, but I'm concerned that it may not appear that I'm committed to either one or not focused.
Are they super different from each other?
Melinda, are they super different from each other? Maybe.
Oh, hello, hi. I had to unmute myself. Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm interested in becoming a data analyst, and then I also have interests in the translation localization industry. So kind of, yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't call them mutually exclusive necessarily, because you're still talking about like highly technical software engineering type projects, and or using data to be able to kind of like answer questions and things like that. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive necessarily. I was kind of worried you were going to tell me it was something like, oh, I want to do teaching, but I'm also kind of really interested in, I don't know, strip mining or something. Right? Like things that were like super, super different from each other. In which case it may be more appropriate to try to figure out how do you kind of like bifurcate like the different methodologies that you're actually using to kind of pursue positions. If you have an interest in and a skill set that actually crosses across a couple of different things, though, I don't know if I'd put it in my headline so much, right? Unless you're trying, because what you could do, is there a thing that you could put in your headline that would be familiar to both? And I can't think of it off the top of my head, but as an example, I use like global HR professional. HR encompasses a lot of different things to different people, right? So there is employee relations, but there's also leadership training, there's compensation and benefits, there's recruiting and hiring, there's a lot of different kind of disciplines within HR. And rather than pigeonhole myself in just the one, I just found a term, I could just use HR to kind of like talk about them in a more general way. And so that's what I'm wondering, is there a way to kind of like talk about like your technical skills and everything else in a more generalized way? And then you can be more specific in like your about or like your cover letter or how you actually talk to people, and kind of adapt it for the situation, right? It depends on who you're talking to in terms of how you actually want to, put yourself forward and kind of emphasize one set of skills over the other. It's an interesting question. I don't know if that helped.
That helped. Thank you.
So I'm very aware of the fact that it's like we're at 6:30, so I want to be respectful of people's weekends and everything else. Let me go really quickly through these next couple of slides, and if there are other questions, I am absolutely happy to take those. So I throw this in here because this is actually part of another presentation that I do on networking for introverts. And what I find is, again, when I talk about like networking, a lot of people are just like, I don't really want to do that. Networking is also different now, right? It used to be that you could go to happy hours and events and whatnot, and you could, kind of talk to people in a big room and that kind of thing. And obviously that's not like the kind of thing that is common these days, right? And so any sort of networking is going to be a much more virtual, I'm going to jump on a phone call, or I might jump on a video call, either with one person or with multiple people. But either way, I think it's kind of a draining thing, particularly if you identify as an introvert. If you don't get energized by these kind of interactions and conversations, then be very conscious of that. But there are still ways to do this in a way that works for you, right? So you can network on your own terms. What my big thing is, set a goal for yourself that isn't ridiculous, right? So if you happen to be attending like a large event, just say, look, if I walk out of here with like 3 or 5 new connections, then I'm going to be excited, right? And that's going to be good. And then I can dive deep on those. In today's kind of virtual sort of thing, like on a weekly basis, I'm going to make 3 new connections, right? And I'm going to reach out to them and follow up and everything else. And I think that's a really strong goal. And over time, by the end of a year, if you continue doing that, right, you'd have like 150 new connections or something. So that's really brilliant. Leverage your skills as an introvert, right? Like listening, analysis, developing solutions, right? Like really go for those kinds of conversations, right? And this aligns with what I was talking about before, where you're really trying to figure out, how can I help you, right? It's not so much I'm going to be trying to sell myself. It's really, I'm trying to figure out what are the ways in which I can actually add value to whatever it is that you're trying to do. And always remember that you actually have knowledge and experience and skills that other people are going to find valuable. You're just trying to figure out who are those people, right? And then let's see, this is again kind of more about events and managing that. I have another list, and I included it in the appendix just in case people want to look at it later, of questions and approaches and tips that you can use when you're actually in networking events, whether they happen to be virtual or not. But the core of this again is, how are you helping other people? How are you making introductions? And that's a really easy thing to do in LinkedIn. because you can just send a message to both of the people that you know and just say, hey, I've always enjoyed really working with both of you. I think there's a lot of things that you could, help each other out with. Wanted to make this introduction. Now I'm going to kind of step out. And so again, you're focusing on how do you help other people? How do you actually add value? What are the opportunities to be able to help other folks? And you're using either a connection format like a virtual call or a phone call, or you can use LinkedIn as that kind of platform as well. And it's another part of that experience that I think is super valuable, and that again, from a karma perspective and everything else, is going to bring more opportunities around to you. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Are there any other questions, things that we didn't address that I'd be able to kind of talk about now?
Yes. Do you have any advice on any advice on listing all the presentations and sessions you created/gave on a LinkedIn page? Projects, publications within the organization space, like how do you suggest going about that?
How do I suggest going about that for other people?
Yes.
I think there's a couple of different things. So there's projects, there's a section on projects, right? Which is kind of interesting because you can also highlight the other people that you worked with in those projects. So if they happen to be other connections on LinkedIn, you'll see, like, you can actually list like the project team and what the actual project was and the date and things like that. How do I feel about putting additional media and things like that? I mean, anything that you put in there to help tell your story more effectively, because people learn in different ways and they consume information in different ways, I think generally speaking is positive. I would try, you still have to balance it though with providing so much information that people are just going to be like, oh, this is too long, I'm not going to go diving into it, right? And it's the consideration that I mentioned before from a privacy standpoint. You may or may not, depending on what it happens to be, you may or may not want to share it because it could be proprietary for your prior organization and they may not want you actually sharing things, or you'd have to do a lot of editing on it in order to do that. People's attention spans are, generally speaking, not terribly long, right? I get resumes, I get CVs sometimes where people have included not only just sort of their recent experience, but like every publication going back to like their book reports from like elementary school, right? So those kinds of things are long and they don't help me necessarily make a decision about hiring you. It may or may not help me kind of understand, is this the person that I want to at least have a conversation with? But again, the profile itself or the document or whatever isn't necessarily going to be the thing that actually gets you the job. It can get people's attention because if they're doing searches and you have more stuff in there that could get hit on a search, then yes, that can be helpful. But again, I would balance that with how necessary is it to have those kinds of things in there, or maybe you just want to have a list in, or a statement in your profile or your resume someplace that says, hey, I have tons of examples of other work that I've done or these projects I've worked on. I'm happy to provide more detailed information if you want to know more. But it's a balancing act, I think. And I don't know, I think there's a core story that you can actually tell, and then you can open the door for being able to share other things if people ask for them.
Thank you. And I know at least one other person, Sadie, had a question, but wanted to verbally rather than write it. So Sadie, do you still have a question?
Yes, I still have a question. I'll turn my video on. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask a question kind of related to like the field you're in terms of management and project management. When I was on JET, I found that I really had a passion for those things. I really enjoyed that aspect of teaching, and I want to kind of pursue that in my career going forward. But in my undergraduate studies, I don't have that background. I have a international relations background. So I'm just wondering how important experience versus certification is, and if it's worth.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the field. And I've heard mixed things on, and maybe if anybody else has like a direct experience with this, feel free to chime in. I've heard mixed things for like project management certifications, right? So there are certain organizations where they think it's super important. There's other organizations where they don't. HR certification is another example, right? So some people will look at it and say, well, if you don't have an HR certification, then we don't want to talk to you. I've met lots of, I'll be honest, I've met lots of certified HR people who I would never trust to be like my HR person, right? So there's a wide variation in all of those things. It's rare that you're going to find something where it's just like an absolute, other than, you know, whatever, if you've got like your law degree or whatever, that's obvious. But, and so I guess my stance on it really is less about like, oh, I'm going to get the certification and therefore people will call me. As a hiring manager, we will put things on there where we will say we prefer to see these kinds of certifications for whatever role it is. All that's really doing is helping us kind of like narrow the pool or have some kind of understanding. Like it just makes it easier. It's like it's one of many filters that we might use to determine whether or not we actually want to talk to somebody. But it's why, and I think the applicant tracking system and whatnot conversation came up on Monday as well. My advice for trying to get around applicant tracking systems is never to go through them in the first place, right? So obviously apply for a position because that's what they actually want you to do. But the more that you can actually talk to a human being, the less likely it is that you're going to run into the problem with, oh, I don't have the certification and therefore I'm not going to get somebody to talk to me, right? So when you can describe what you've done, when you can actually have a conversation with somebody, you're going to be a lot more effective at being able to convince them that, oh, okay, they don't have a certification, but they have the equivalent years of experience, and so I'm good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And I just want to warn everyone, it is, 6:45 Pacific time, getting late. So if you have to leave, that's okay. Otherwise, we'll stay for another 15 minutes if anybody has any other questions. And feel free, like you can either physically raise your hand, use the chat, or use the handy raising hand and participants window if I can find that. Okay, Rob, how have you evolved your networking style over the years? What doesn't work anymore?
How have I evolved my, that's an interesting question. What doesn't work anymore? I tend not to do events and whatnot very much anymore. And that this was before everything like events and stuff stopped. But it used to be like, okay, I should go to the Lake Washington Human Resources Association, happy hours, or I should go to these business association happy hours or whatever it was, right? And these guys have these big, it's a restaurant or it's, some other forum where there's just like 100 people in there and everybody's just kind of milling around. And I know how to work those kinds of events and I know how to manage conversations within them, but I just know myself, I get incredibly drained doing that kind of thing, right? Like that's just exhausting for me. And it's not necessarily that productive because most of the people that I'm talking to are really just trying to think for themselves, how do I find another job or another connection or whatever? And so they're not necessarily really listening to the people that they're actually talking to so much. They're just trying to like distribute as many business cards as they possibly can. So I've stopped kind of spending a ton of time in those kinds of forums. I have people like my own networking these days is more about mining the people that I've already worked with, right? Not to go back necessarily to companies that, well, I'm not against going back to companies I've actually worked at, but it's not so much that I'm doing that on purpose. It's the cool thing is everybody else's careers have continued to grow and develop as well, right? So people that I worked at one organization have now landed in another organization. And so now I can kind of talk to them and say, oh, what do you think about your new company, right? And then the other piece for me is I haven't necessarily, it's very hard to just kind of keep up all of your connections, all of your conversations, right? But I have tried to kind of get over the idea of, I haven't talked to this person in 3 years, therefore I feel bad about reaching out to them, right? I think it's always important to kind of get over that and just kind of like say, look, time passes really quickly for everybody, right? Like we all know that that happens. And if somebody happens to reach out to you, this just happened to me this morning. So somebody I worked with 5 years ago just kind of emailed me out of the blue on LinkedIn, says, hey, I'm getting ready to make a career transition. We used to have those kinds of conversations. Would you be willing to talk to me? I was like, sure, that's fine. I get to catch up with you. I hear what you're doing. Have a fun conversation with somebody that I used to work with. There was never a moment in my head where I was thinking, oh, I can't believe it. This person's reaching out to me after 5 years. What a scumbag. I'm not going to call them, right? So I'm trying to get over that for myself. Like when I'm reaching out to people, I do feel bad that it's been a long time that I haven't talked to them. But on the other hand, it's a really cool opportunity to kind of catch up with people and find out what they've been doing in the intervening years.
Zara would like to know, when you've been on the hiring team or the hiring manager, what were some of the most standout things on candidates' LinkedIn profiles that you've seen?
And I'm sorry, Rob, this is Zara. They can be good, and I put good in quotations because that's subjective, or they can be not so good, like the red flags maybe. So those are always fun, though, keeping it positive, so yeah.
We could do the red flags first. Like, so when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of like resumes and LinkedIn profiles, you do start, stuff like that kind of leaps out at you, and it's kind of funny. Thankfully, I haven't really seen it too much anymore. I think people have got more savvy about it, but like, don't wear sunglasses in your photo. That's kind of goofy. It really shouldn't be a vacation photo. It should only be you. I love the people who have like 2 or 3 people in their photos. Now I'm like, I don't know who you are. So there's some really goofy things like that I've seen way back in the day. This doesn't really happen so much anymore, thank God. You have people who like put links to like their personal websites and things like that on their resume, and you go out to look, and yes, they have some stuff about work, but then they also have stuff about real personal stuff they shouldn't be sharing like with a potential employer, right? So those are kind of like the obvious things. Standout things, it stands out for me when somebody has a series of good recommendations, not like okay, this is a tricky space. So if somebody has like 20 or 30 like recommendations, what I will do is go look at the person providing the recommendation and seeing if the candidate that I was getting ready to talk to has also provided a recommendation back for them, because a lot of people will do that, right? So if you provide a nice recommendation for me, I will provide a recommendation for you. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but when it's a bunch of them like that, then I just kind of worry like, okay, now you're stuffing the ballot box with like just all these positive things, and I'm not sure whether to believe them or not. But I do think it is incredibly important to have at least some people that you could go to and say, hey, you know what, I'd be happy to provide a recommendation of this aspect of your work because I was really pleased to get to work with you and stuff like that. So I look for those, and I do think they're super important. I look for more than just a, with LinkedIn, I'm trying to, anytime I've been in a hiring manager's position, right? So if I'm going to be adding somebody to my team, I'm not adding a list of skills, right? People don't hire resumes, they hire other people, right? And I'm trying to kind of figure out, are you going to fit into the team? Are you going to help grow the skill sets of other people? Are you going to be able to grow with this organization? And so in LinkedIn, I'm kind of looking for, is this somebody that I want to work with? Is this somebody that I want to spend time with? And so in your about section, you can put lots of different things that you can't put in your resume, right? Stuff that is more about how you do the work and what other people kind of say about you than it is just about like a reiteration of, here are the dry, skills that I've done, or I'm very interested in working in, marketing or whatever it is. It's not that those things aren't true, but you're kind of wasting real estate, in my opinion, right? Like LinkedIn gives you an opportunity to do a much more personal view of, here's who I am, here's what it's like to work with me, here's why you might want me as a member of your team. Who knows? I mentioned like, because they're very important to me, I mentioned like photography and food on mine, on my LinkedIn, and I'm very pleased that the last team that I was working on, we had so many people on the team who were like into food, right? Like every time for lunch was like a big conversation for us because we'd be trying to decide which food truck to try and all these kinds of things. But it helped us really bond as a group, right? And I didn't necessarily look for it on LinkedIn, but like when you are actually interviewing people and getting to kind of know them, sometimes it comes up, and it does actually make a difference to me, like in terms of, okay, and I've got these two candidates that I'm trying to weigh. Who is it that I think is really gonna like, you know, fit with the group, grow with the group, you know, be able to add something to our dynamic. And I'm also at the same time trying to be super conscious of the fact that I want to have a very diverse team, right? And I don't want to just have everybody be the exact same. So, you know, when you can find those kinds of differentiators on somebody's LinkedIn profile, it is helpful.
Thank you so much for that, and how in depth, and also just making us all laugh and smile. So thank you.
Yes. And I think we have time for one more question, and it's actually Bahia. She has a related question about photos.
Yeah, so obviously LinkedIn is very different from resumes, and it's kind of this hybrid between a resume and social media. Now in the US, obviously we don't put photos on resumes, and that is, I think, in a lot of places illegal and not really something you should do, while in Japan it's pretty common. But
Yep.
my question is about LinkedIn photos, like, you know, there's certain profile information that you can limit. Should you make your profile photo available to everybody? Are there any drawbacks to doing that? Should everybody be putting it out there, or should you limit that information along with some of the other information you're limiting on your LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, that's a good question, because and you know, everybody's threshold for privacy is different, right? Which is why I think that that functionality is even in there in the first place. Like, so for me, like I don't think about it. Like if I'm sharing my photo and stuff like that, I just let that be public for everybody. But I draw the line at, like, again, everybody's different. I draw the line at like my phone number. Like I don't throw that in there or allow people to kind of like search for me based on my phone number. And yet I have a website where my phone number and contact information is out there publicly. So you can still find those things. I just don't necessarily make it part of my profile because it's not necessarily the way that I want to be searched. And, you know, those things can be a lot more public than a website that typically I think people have to kind of go through me to actually find. I think that's a personal decision for everyone. As far as downsides go, you know, from a hiring perspective, you know, the photo is more about, you know, I'm able to see everybody's photo, so I'm just kind of curious about it, but I'm not, you know, I'm not, and I should not be making any sort of decisions or judgments based on somebody's photograph, right? And I like to think that most organizations, that is true, right? Where they're just kind of like, oh, okay, if you happen to have, for example, if you happen to have like an unusual name and somebody's just kind of curious, like, how should I be addressing this person? It can be helpful to be able to see the photo and be, oh, okay, great. But people don't always necessarily identify themselves that way, right? Like it can be different from what you're actually seeing or assuming from like a photograph. I had a teammate like that actually, right? So, and he was in the midst of like sort of a transition. And so it wasn't even obvious when you met him in person, right? And so he had just kind of gotten used to, thank goodness. When he introduced himself, he simply said, hey, I identify as male and prefer it if you use these kinds of pronouns. And so, great, awesome. But I would never have tried to, you know, just look at a photo and go, oh, okay, this is exactly what this person is supposed to be. Now, not everybody does that. And even for me, like I may forget sometimes. But not including your photo, I think is fine. People just may, you know, need more information in terms of how to address you or how to engage with you or whatever, like afterwards, like as you're having like more conversations. Because at some point, if they're going to hire you, at some point they're going to see you. But it can be like your decision, again, from a privacy standpoint, whether or not you want that to be something that's like, you know, openly and publicly searchable.
Great, thank you. So I think with that, where it's getting kind of late, so going to end this session. Reminder, I pressed the wrong button. Reminder that tomorrow all of our sessions need to be pre-registered, so please do that if you're planning to do it. I just threw the links in the chat, but also check your email. Thank you, Rob, so much. It was great hearing you speak like it always is. And I hope you all have a great evening or day wherever you are. So take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.